A millionaire had a night of love with his maid, and 5 years later he saw her in the park with a child. It was an autumn morning, the city bathed in gentle light, the air crisp and alive with energy. Families strolled with their children, young couples snapped photos under tree-lined paths, and the calls of street vendors blended seamlessly into the lively symphony of the Central Park. Amidst this ordinary yet vibrant scene, Ethan Walker, an architect and university lecturer, walked quietly, savoring a rare sense of peace he had lost for years. For Ethan, mornings like this had become a kind of medicine for the soul. After years drowned in work and haunted by emptiness, he was slowly learning how to reconnect with the simplicity of life. But he never imagined that within a heartbeat, that fragile world would be torn apart. His eyes froze on a little boy chasing a ball across the grass. The boy was about 5 years old, small in frame, but bursting with energy. Soft brown curls bounced in the breeze, and his laughter rang out brighter than all the noise around him. At first, Ethan smiled like any passerby, admiring a child at play. But the moment the boy turned his face toward him, Ethan's smile vanished. His chest tightened violently. Those eyes, that stance, the determined frown as he kicked the ball, it was like staring into a mirror from 30 years ago. His whole body stiffened. A strange wave, both sweet and agonizing, crashed against his heart. Impossible, he thought. This cannot be just coincidence. Then his gaze shifted to the bench nearby. A woman sat there, hair shorter than he remembered, posture more assured, eyes carrying a calm maturity. Yet Ethan recognized her instantly. Clara Reyes, the woman he had once loved with every fiber of his being, the woman who had disappeared from his life without a word 5 years ago. 5 years ago, on a stormy April night, Ethan Walker paced restlessly along the marble corridors of the Walker mansion, unable to concentrate on the pile of documents scattered across the mahogany desk. His company had just signed the most important contract of his career, yet his mind was consumed entirely by her, Clara Reyes. The 23-year-old young woman who had come to work as a maid for his family 6 months earlier had awakened something no other woman of his social class ever had. She made him truly feel alive. The brief conversations they shared whenever she cleaned his office had become the moments he looked forward to most each day. The way she smiled shyly when he asked about her evening nursing classes, or the faint blush on her cheeks whenever their eyes accidentally met. But there was one insurmountable barrier. His mother, Margaret Walker, had made it perfectly clear from the very beginning. A maid would always remain a maid, and any romantic involvement would result in immediate dismissal. The soft echo of footsteps in the corridor pulled him from his tangled thoughts. It was her. Clara always came to clean his office at precisely 11 p.m., and tonight was no exception. Ethan's heart raced when he saw her appear at the doorway, her neatly pressed uniform, her hair tied into a perfect ponytail. Her large brown eyes looked at him with respect, and something far deeper he had only recently begun to notice. It was longing. It was love. Everything they had both been denying for months. The tension between them was so sharp it could almost be cut with a knife. Clara entered the room in silence, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged the papers, fully aware of his gaze following her every move. When she accidentally knocked over the vase of water, they both bent down to grab the cloth, their faces only centimeters apart. Time seemed to stop in that forbidden yet magical moment. Ethan felt her quickened breath, saw the slight quiver of her lips, inhaled the cheap yet intoxicating scent of her perfume. Her eyes met his, filled with a devotion that seemed to pierce his tormented soul. For months they had circled around the powerful attraction between them, pretending it didn't exist, fighting it with every ounce of reason. But now, under the dim desk lamp and the relentless sound of rain outside, every barrier crumbled. Without a word, Ethan gently cupped Clara's cheek. She closed her eyes, leaning into his palm as if she had been waiting for that touch her entire life. The electricity between them was so intense that both knew there was no turning back. Fate had taken control. What followed was an explosion of emotions suppressed for far too long. Ethan lifted her face in his hands and kissed her with a hunger that even he hadn't anticipated. Clara responded with the same intensity, as if she had been waiting since the very first time she laid eyes on him. They held each other tightly, a true embrace of love, of two souls finally finding each other in the world. Class, prohibitions, consequences. All of it vanished in that raw, undeniable instant. Ethan led her to the sofa in his study, where they whispered words of love and eternal promises, their passion entwining them beyond every boundary. That night was the most complete and intense of their lives, but also the last time they would ever be together. For destiny had already drawn different plans, and the bliss of that night came at a terrible price. At dawn, Clara Reyes quietly slipped back into the servants' quarters, never imagining that the sweet night of love would change her life forever. Ethan Walker remained awake until morning, replaying every moment, every kiss, every passionate touch. For the first time in his life, he felt he had found true love. Meanwhile, Clara lay curled up on her small bed, a happy smile still lingering on her lips, her heart brimming with hope. She dreamed of a future where love could overcome every barrier. Both believed they had discovered everlasting happiness, unaware that fate had already begun weaving a plan to tear them apart. Margaret Walker needed no time to notice the change in her son. A seasoned executive, she had mastered the art of reading the smallest flickers on people's faces. When she saw Ethan's unusually radiant expression at breakfast and Clara keeping her gaze down, avoiding eye contact, Margaret knew instantly. Confirmation came when Margaret summoned Clara to the living room under the pretext of reviewing some documents. Clara entered, still carrying a faint smile from the night before, the smile of someone who had just discovered a fragile happiness. But Margaret's cold stare extinguished every trace of warmth in a heartbeat. "You think I don't see?" Margaret's voice was calm, almost measured, but sharp as a blade. "You've played your cards well. A poor student sneaks into the studio, then seduces my son." Clara's face drained of color. She shook her head quickly. "No, that's not true, Mrs. Walker. Ethan and what we have is real." Margaret let out a contemptuous laugh. "Real? Do you think I haven't seen this before? Girls like you always have one purpose, to climb as fast as possible, and my son, foolish enough to fall for it." Each word sliced into Clara's heart. She wanted to protest, to scream that there had been no scheme, only the purity of true affection. But Margaret's eyes were steel, leaving no space for negotiation. "Listen carefully, Clara." Margaret rose, stepping closer, each movement pressing the air from the room. "You will leave this place immediately. I've already called every architecture firm, every hospital that might hire you. From now on, no one will. Your record is marked, and if you even think of returning to Ethan—" She paused, her lips curving into a cruel smile. "Then prepare to be utterly destroyed. My lawyers are ready to charge you with harassment, with opportunism. Once that becomes public, your career, your studies, over." Clara trembled, eyes burning with unshed tears. The humiliation pressed against her chest like a crushing weight. All her efforts, her dreams, wiped out in a single morning. Margaret handed her a thin envelope, the minimum wage due for her part-time work. No thanks, no acknowledgement. Just a cold, definitive ending. "You have 1 hour to collect your things, then disappear." Margaret turned away, dismissing Clara as though she were nothing more than dust on her immaculate floor. Clara stood frozen, her hands trembling around the envelope as tears broke free. She had dared believe that love could bridge the gulf of class. But now she understood. The power of money and status could crush even the truest of hearts. Clara left the Walker building that morning with swollen eyes and a heart in pieces. The storm outside had passed, but inside her a far fiercer tempest roared on. Everything she had, her job, her studies, and the fragile love that had just blossomed, was severed in one merciless morning. She found shelter in a cramped apartment on the poor side of town, where her cousin Isabella welcomed her with open arms. It was just a single-bedroom flat, walls stained with damp, but at least it offered a fragile sense of safety. The days that followed became a waking nightmare. Clara handed out resumes everywhere, from small architecture offices to cafes, but rejection met her at every door. Some employers barely glanced at her papers before turning her away. Margaret's threat had been no empty menace. Her network of influence had blocked every path forward. At night, Clara lay restless, listening to rain dripping on the rusted tin roof above. She thought of Ethan, remembered the look in his eyes that night, and her chest ached all over again. Yet alongside the pain grew another, more terrifying truth. 2 weeks later, when her body began to show unsettling changes, Clara knew fate had not finished with her. She slipped quietly into a free clinic in the neighborhood. When the doctor handed her the results with a look of sympathy, Clara's hands shook uncontrollably. She was pregnant. 5 weeks. Exactly the time since that fateful night with Ethan. Clara sat frozen, the paper trembling between her fingers. Her heart plummeted into a bottomless abyss. No job, no money, no future. And now, within her fragile frame, a new life was forming. Ethan's child. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks. But amidst the crushing despair, a small flame flickered to life. She whispered to herself, "I will keep this baby." Not because she hoped Ethan would return, not because she dreamed of a rosy future, but because this child was the last remnant of the love she had once known, the living proof that night had been real, not just a fleeting dream. The months that followed became a struggle for survival. Clara found work as a waitress in a small downtown diner where the owner, Mr. Ramirez, asked no questions about her past. She worked 12-hour shifts, hiding her morning sickness, forcing herself to smile as she carried trays of food through exhaustion. Isabella, her cousin, was the only one who knew the truth. She helped Clara with rent when she fell short, took her to the public hospital for checkups, and offered quiet comfort through wordless embraces. Every night when Clara returned to the tiny apartment, she placed her hand over her belly and whispered softly, "Lucas, I'm here. Your father is a good man, though you will never know him. But you will grow in my love, and I promise I'll shield you from every storm outside." It was a painful vow, but the only thing that kept her standing. Clara knew that if Ethan or Margaret ever discovered, her son would become a target of the same cruelty she had endured, and she swore she would never let that happen. And then, on a freezing January night, after 18 hours of labor in a public hospital, Lucas Reyes was born. The name had been chosen with great care. Lucas. The first time she laid eyes on her son, Clara Reyes felt her heart stop. The boy looked exactly like Ethan Walker, from the deep, piercing eyes, the shape of his mouth, down to the small scar on his chin that Ethan had carried since childhood. It was as if the universe had deliberately sent her a perfect replica of the man she once loved, as both a gift and a punishment. Isabella burst into tears as she held baby Lucas for the first time, whispering that he was the most beautiful child she had ever seen. As for Clara, she stayed awake through that first night, watching her son sleep, memorizing every feature, every breath, and silently vowing a promise in her heart. She would be the best mother. She would give him all the love in the world. She would be his mother, his father, and his only safe haven. Lucas would become her entire world, the very reason for her to keep on living. And one day, when her son was old enough to understand the truth, Clara Reyes would tell him about his father, a good and noble man who had created him out of love, yet would forever remain unaware of his existence. But for now, that secret would stay buried deep in her heart, to protect her child from the cruel world that had torn them apart forever. 5 years passed, and Ethan Walker had become a completely different man. The pain of Clara's mysterious disappearance had left invisible but profound scars within him. He had desperately searched for her for months. He hired private investigators, checked every hospital and civil registry in the city, as if Clara had been swallowed by the earth itself. His mother told him that she had returned to her hometown to care for an ailing relative. But Ethan was not convinced. He knew Clara, knew her passion for studying nursing, her dreams and ambitions. She could never have abandoned everything without a single word of farewell. After a year of fruitless searching, Ethan was slowly consumed by despair and obsession. The man who once laughed so easily became withdrawn, haunted, and unbearably lonely. In the end, he was forced to accept a cruel truth. Clara had chosen to leave him, and he would have to learn to live with that emptiness. Yet he had never stopped loving her, and he had never stopped dreaming of the day they would meet again. 5 years had passed. Ethan had learned to live with the emptiness, though his heart had never truly healed. And then, on a crisp autumn morning in the Central Park, fate hurled him into a moment he could never have imagined. The boy. The image of the child chasing a ball burned into his mind like an indelible mark. Ethan stood frozen, eyes locked on every movement. When the boy looked up, his smile radiant, his eyes clear and bright, Ethan's heart stopped. All doubts, all questions vanished, leaving only one truth. This was his son. His body trembled as he took hesitant steps forward, unable to come too close. Emotion surged through him, nearly suffocating. A storm of questions raged inside him. How had Clara raised him alone? Why had she hidden the child? What had his son's 5 years been like? And then his gaze fell on the woman seated on the nearby bench. Clara. She had changed. The same face, the same eyes that once captivated him, but now tempered with maturity, carrying a quiet strength. She smiled as she watched her son play, a smile both tender and heavy with sacrifice. Ethan felt his legs weaken, but mustered every ounce of courage and began walking toward them. That short distance suddenly felt like the longest journey of his life. Each step weighed with 5 years of regret. When he was about 10 meters away, Clara happened to look up. In that instant, time shattered. Her face went pale, eyes widening in shock. She sprang to her feet, instinctively pulling the boy into her arms like a lioness guarding her cub. No, it can't be. Her lips trembled, soundless. Ethan stopped, his chest aching at the terror in her eyes. He wanted to run forward, to hold them both, to speak 1,000 explanations, but the words strangled in his throat. The boy looked at him with innocent curiosity, eyes identical to Ethan's own from years ago. Those eyes nearly broke him in front of the bustling park. He drew a deep breath and finally spoke, voice trembling. "Clara, please, we need to talk." Clara clutched her son tighter, eyes wide with panic. The child tilted his head, his voice soft and innocent. "Mom, who is he? Why are you sad?" The question pierced through Ethan Walker's heart like a knife. It confirmed what he had always known but never dared to admit. His son did not know who he was. The boy he had dreamed of for 5 years was now standing right before him, yet saw him only as a stranger. The air grew so heavy that even the bystanders began to take notice. A woman paused to watch, sensing the tension though she did not understand it. A group of teenagers stopped their soccer game, their eyes fixed on the three people caught in a silent storm of emotion. But for Ethan, Clara Reyes, and Lucas Reyes, the rest of the world faded away. There was only them, three souls bound together by blood, by love, and by secrets that had never been spoken. Ethan slowly extended his hand toward Lucas, not touching him, just a friendly gesture, as he smiled softly. "Hello, son. My name is Ethan. It's very nice to meet you." The boy looked at the offered hand for a few seconds, then glanced at his mother for permission. When Clara gave the slightest nod, Lucas shyly placed his small hand in Ethan's, their first touch as father and son. For Ethan, it was like a jolt of electricity through his heart. At last, after all those years, he had touched his child. Clara stood frozen, her heart breaking. She saw the way Lucas reacted to Ethan, the way his eyes lit up, the natural instinctive connection, as if something deep inside him had recognized the truth. And she understood. She could never replace that sacred bond. Her first instinct was to pull Lucas away as quickly as possible, to escape Ethan's gaze, to avoid a confrontation in public. Her heart pounded like a drum, drowning out every sound around her. She had spent 5 years building a new life, a new identity, a world without Ethan. She had changed jobs 3 times, moved houses 4 times, avoiding every place where she might run into someone from her past. All of it just to keep Lucas safe from the iron grip of Margaret Walker. When they reached the parking lot, Clara stopped, not because she wanted to, but because her legs could no longer carry her forward. She lifted Lucas into her arms, holding him tightly, trembling. She wasn't only afraid of losing her son, she feared that once the truth came out, the safe world she had built would shatter forever. Lucas had always believed that his father was a good man who had died before he was born. A sad but simple story, a fairy tale he could accept. But now, with Ethan standing just a few steps away, eyes full of emotion, everything would change. The boy would learn the truth. But Clara did not know. Could his tender soul survive the shock? Lucas began asking questions nonstop, just like any 5-year-old would. "Mom, why is that man following us from the park? Is he scaring you? Do you know him?" Clara Reyes fought back her tears, squeezed her son's hand tightly, and whispered, "We're going to the cafe across the street, my love. It's quiet there. I'll explain everything." They walked in silence, with Ethan Walker following a few steps behind. Each footstep felt like a storm pressing against all 3 hearts. In Clara's mind, 100 questions swirled. Where should she begin? How could she tell her son without frightening him? How could she keep from losing his trust? At the cafe, they chose a table in a secluded corner. Lucas was given a coloring book. Clara sat across from Ethan, struggling to keep her composure. She looked at her son, her heart aching. "Lucas, sweetheart, do you remember the stories I used to tell you about your father?" Lucas lifted his head from the coloring page, his clear eyes wide. "I remember. Daddy was a really good man, but he died before I was born. Right, Mom?" That answer struck Ethan's heart like 100 knives. Clara swallowed hard. She gripped her son's hand, took a deep breath, and said softly, "My son, there's something very important I need to tell you about your father. Everything I've done, everything I've kept from you. It was all because I love you more than anything in this world." Lucas set down his crayon and stared at his mother with an unusual seriousness for a 5-year-old. "Your father, he isn't in heaven like I told you. He's still alive. And," her voice broke, "and he's the man sitting right in front of you." Silence. For a few seconds, no one breathed. Then Lucas looked at Ethan, then back at his mother. In a small, trembling voice, he asked, "He's my dad. Mom?" Ethan could only nod, his eyes red with tears. Clara gazed into her son's eyes, eyes swirling with emotions he couldn't yet name. "Yes, my love, this is your father, and he's been searching for you for 5 years." The truth swept over them like a final gust of wind, tearing away the last clinging leaves. Lucas blinked several times, then whispered, "Then, why didn't Daddy ever come to find me?" That simple, short question was the heaviest sentence Ethan had ever heard. His voice broke as he answered, pouring out all his sincerity. "Because I never knew you existed. If I had known, no storm, no mountain, no fire could have kept me from you. I would have come for you from the very first day." Lucas studied him for a long moment before asking quietly, "Will you stay now? Will you really be my dad?" Clara felt breathless. This was the moment she could never take back. The answer would change everything, and Ethan, without a second's hesitation, leaned down, looked into his son's eyes, tears streaming down his face, and said, "If you'll let me, then I'll be your father, forever." After the meeting in the cafe, Ethan felt as though he had awakened from years of wandering. He knew he had lost too much time, but at least now he had the chance to make things right. He wanted to stand by Clara. He wanted to be a real father to Lucas. What he hadn't anticipated was the next storm, Margaret Walker. Somehow the news reached her, perhaps from the curious stares in the park or whispers from acquaintances who had happened to see them. Only days later, Ethan found himself face to face with his mother in the penthouse living room. Margaret stood by the window, arms crossed, her voice sharp with fury. "What are you planning, Ethan? Bringing that bastard child into this house? Do you realize what that will do to our family's name?" Ethan clenched his fists, struggling to keep his composure. "Lucas is not a bastard. He's my son, my flesh and blood." Margaret turned, her eyes blazing. "Which makes it all the more dangerous. A child with no lineage, a mother from nothing. They will drag you down, Ethan. Everything I've built for our reputation will be ruined." Ethan stepped forward, his voice thunderous, stronger than ever before. "You destroyed Clara's life once. I won't let you do it again. If you try to touch them, I will cut ties with you." The words struck the opulent room like a hammer blow. Margaret froze, stunned that the obedient son she once molded would dare defy her. "You would go against me?" Her voice cracked, trembling with both rage and disbelief. "I have no choice," Ethan replied, his eyes burning. "I lost Clara once. I lost 5 years of fatherhood. I will not lose them again. If I must choose between this family and them, I choose Clara and Lucas." Silence engulfed the room. Margaret trembled with anger, yet in Ethan's gaze she saw something she had never seen before, a resolve that could not be broken. The battle had officially begun, and this time Ethan was no longer the passive son living under her control. He was a father, a man ready to sacrifice everything to protect what was his. The clash between Ethan and Margaret dragged on for days, every meal in the penthouse turning into a silent battlefield. Clara tried to stay away. Lucas was too young to understand, but Ethan knew, if this continued, tragedy would repeat itself. And then a man Ethan rarely turned to stepped forward, his father, Richard Walker. Unlike Margaret, Richard was quiet, reserved, the one managing the family's finances in the background. He seldom interfered in his son's personal life, leaving control to Margaret. But this time he invited Ethan to his private study, a warm room lined with bookshelves, faintly scented with tobacco. Richard sat solemnly behind his desk, his aged eyes fixed on his son. "I've heard about Clara and about the boy." Ethan nodded, unflinching. "Yes, Lucas is my son. I will protect them, no matter what Mother says." A pause lingered. Then Richard sighed, as though carrying a burden for years. "You know, Ethan, I understand better than anyone what it feels like to have love forbidden, because I once did too. Ethan froze. His father rarely spoke of the past. Richard continued, voice slow, heavy with regret. When I was young, I loved a simple girl, but your grandmother forced me to marry Margaret to strengthen the alliance between our families. I obeyed, and in return, I gained a lifetime of regret. Do you wonder why I've always stayed silent? Because I knew I was wrong from the very beginning. Ethan sat stunned. For the first time, he saw fragility in his father's eyes. Richard placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder, his voice resolute. Do not repeat my mistake. If you believe Clara and the boy are truly your family, then fight for them. I will not stand in your way. In fact, I will stand with you, even against Margaret if I must. Ethan clasped his father's hand tightly, his eyes burning with tears. For the first time in years, he no longer felt alone in this battle. On the weekend, the Walker penthouse was thick with tension. Ethan knew this was the decisive day, the day he would face his mother without retreat. But this time, he didn't come alone. Clara and Lucas walked beside him, and Richard sat quietly in the living room, waiting. Margaret descended the staircase, her presence commanding, her eyes icy as they landed on Clara holding Lucas. I warned you, Ethan, her voice cut like a blade. And still, you dare bring them here? Do you no longer respect me as your mother? Ethan stepped in front of Clara and his son, his gaze unwavering. Mother, I won't hide anymore. This is my family. Lucas is my son. Clara is the woman I love. I will protect them, whether you approve or not. Margaret let out a brittle, mocking laugh. Family? A bastard child and a lowborn girl? Ethan, you've gone mad? You're destroying everything we've built. Clara trembled, clutching Lucas tightly. The boy sensed the tension, clinging to his mother, his anxious eyes darting to the man he had only just learned was his father. Ethan didn't back down. He stepped forward, his voice thunderous. No, Mother. You're the one destroying everything. Because of your cruelty, I lost Clara once. Because of your control, I lost 5 years of fatherhood. But no more. If you try to tear us apart again, I will cut ties. Margaret froze, fury flashing in her eyes. But before she could speak, Richard's voice rang out, deep and resolute. Enough, Margaret. The room fell silent. Margaret turned, stunned that her husband had spoken against her. Richard, you too? You side with him? Richard rose, moving slowly to stand beside Ethan, resting a firm hand on his son's shoulder. No, I stand on the side of what's right. We've lived our lives in lies, Margaret. You turned love into a tool, marriage into a transaction. And now you would destroy our son's life for the sake of a reputation built on falsehoods? I won't allow it. Margaret faltered, her face pale. For the first time in years, she felt her authority slipping. Ethan turned to Clara, gently taking her hand. His voice trembled with emotion, but burned with resolve. From this day forward, we will no longer live in the shadows. Clara, Lucas, this is my real family. Lucas looked up, from his mother to his father. In his innocent eyes flickered a spark of hope. Margaret stood silent, her hands trembling. She longed to scream, to reclaim control, but the eyes before her, Ethan's, Richard's, Clara's, and Lucas's, left her feeling more alone than ever. The battle in the penthouse that day had no weapons, but it was the fiercest battle of Ethan's life. And for the first time, he emerged victorious. After the fiery confrontation in the penthouse, Ethan, Clara, and Lucas's lives began a new chapter. The road ahead remained full of challenges, but at least they were no longer alone. Ethan started spending more time with Lucas. For the first time, he walked his son to kindergarten, awkward like a father, taking his very first steps in a new role. Lucas clutched his hand tightly, his innocent joy filling Ethan's heart with a healing warmth he had long been denied. In the evenings, they gathered for dinner in Clara's small apartment. No lavish banquets, no hollow laughter echoing through opulent dining halls. Just a simple wooden table, modest meals, and genuine warmth. Clara smiled as she watched father and son chatting, and in those moments she felt that all her past suffering had finally found meaning. Richard often visited as well. He brought small gifts for Lucas, and sometimes simply sat in silence, watching the little family together. His eyes carried regret for his past choices, but also peace, finally seeing his son walk the path he himself had once lost. Margaret was different. She almost disappeared from family gatherings, her once dominant voice absent from the house. She kept to herself in silence, her bitter gaze occasionally following from afar. But Ethan was no longer afraid. He knew this time the choice of his life belonged to him alone. Clara, after years of hiding in the shadows, began to dream again. Ethan encouraged her to return to nursing, promising to support her in completing the studies she had been forced to abandon. At first, Clara hesitated, afraid it was too late, but every time she looked at Lucas, she knew it was never too late to build a new future. One evening, after Lucas had fallen asleep, Ethan held Clara's hand, his eyes earnest. "I've already lost too many years, but I swear, from now on, you and Lucas will be at the center of everything I do. I can't promise a perfect life, but I promise I'll always be here." Clara nodded silently, tears streaming, but they were tears of joy. Their lives weren't suddenly easy. But now each hardship no longer felt like tragedy. It became a chance to grow closer. Step by step, they learned to forgive, to rebuild from broken pieces. And above all, they learned to love without condition, the very thing both Ethan and Clara had longed for all their lives.